The mountain chapel smelled of cold stone and even colder judgment. A raw autumn wind came howling down off the peaks and pushed through the open doors, dragging the whispers of the whole village in with it. And those whispers wrapped around Ravna like a chain pulled tight. She stood at the carved stone altar, the only orc in a chapel packed wall to wall with humans, in a borrowed wedding shawl that was 2 sizes too small. Pale cream lace strained across her green shoulders. Her hands shook around a fistful of wilted mountain heather, and she counted the floorboards between her and the door, the way a drowning girl counts breaths. 12 steps. Only 12 steps to run. For one wild, desperate heartbeat, she thought she might do it. But every soul in the valley town of Stone Hollow was crammed into those rough wooden pews behind her, and every last one of them had come to watch the same impossible thing. An orc girl, here, at a human altar. Some had come with pity. Most had come with fear. All of them had come to see her handed over to the one man in 3 valleys who frightened her people more than death itself. Because across from her, towering even over her orcish frame, still and grim and carved from weather and war, stood the thing she had been sold to. Aldric Thorne, the mountain guardian, a human. Tall and broad and weathered, dark hair shot with early gray, a hard jaw rough with stubble, a long pale scar splitting one brow. 6 feet and more of old muscle and older grief. The most feared warrior in the borderlands. The man who had held the high pass through the war. The human whose name orc mothers still used to hush their cubs at night. Be still, or Thorne will come. They said he had cut down more of her kind than any soldier living, and in a few moments, by stone and by vow, this orc killer would own her future with a single mark of his hand. She had braced herself for cruelty when she first looked up at him that morning. She had expected the cold contempt of a man given an enemy as a prize. Instead, she found only stillness. He held a worn, leather-bound book against his chest, the way a smaller man might hold a hat, like he didn't quite know what to do with his own hands. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, a man hiding storms beneath still water. Her father was not in the chapel. The old headman of the broken Ashfang clan could not bear to watch what his own desperation had done to his only daughter. 3 winters of failed hunts, a clan scattered and starving after the war that Thorne himself had helped to win. And then a smiling stranger in a clean coat, a war broker named Varkas, had come to their ragged camp with a contract and an offer. He would settle the clan's blood debt to the human valley in full. He would buy them peace and grain and a winter they might survive. All it would cost was one girl married off to the human guardian on the mountain. Her father had wept when he told her, and then he had pressed his thumb to the contract anyway. No one asked Ravna what she wanted. When the human elder finally spoke her name, stumbling over the orcish sound of it, her breath caught in her throat like a splinter. Do you, Ravna of the Ashfang, take this guardian, Aldric Thorne of the High Pass, to stand as your bonded husband until the mountain itself forgets your names? The whole room leaned in, hungry for her answer. I do, she whispered, her voice cracked like thin spring ice breaking under too much weight. The elder turned to the human, and the whole village braced for the customary words, the same heavy words every bonded man spoke. But Aldric Thorne did not give them the words they expected. His voice came out low, gravel over stone. I will. He paused. The lamplight caught the hard line of his jaw. Not I do. I won't say I do. A man does a thing once and it's done. I will keep her. I will try. That's the only vow I've got worth swearing. A murmur rolled through the pews like distant thunder rolling off the ridge. Ravna felt her stomach twist. He still had not looked at her, not once since she'd walked that endless aisle. Then by stone and by storm, the elder said, I name you bonded, guardian and wife. The words landed as heavy as the slam of a cell door, and only then did Aldric Thorne finally turn, slowly, carefully, the way a man turns toward something he's afraid of, startling. And he offered her his arm. She stared at it as if it might burn her green skin to the bone. This was the man whose name had frightened her since she was a cub. The human her people called the Pale Death. And now he was her husband, and he had bought her future with the debt of a starving clan she might never see again. Her hand hovered in the empty air between them, and then, because there was nothing else left to do, she set it on his forearm. His arm was warm and corded with old muscle under her palm. But the touch he gave her in return was not claiming. It was only steady, careful, almost, and this was the part that frightened her most of all. Almost apologetic. Now, before we climb that mountain road with her, and trust me, you are going to want to be there for what waits at the top. I have to ask you something, because this channel is brand new, and every single subscribe is what keeps stories like this one being told. It's free, it takes you 1 second, and it honestly means more than you could know. So, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. And let's keep climbing together. They walked back down the aisle, through a gauntlet of staring human eyes. Outside, the wind bit cold. A heavy mountain wagon waited, harnessed to 2 shaggy beasts the size of plow oxen. Aldric lifted his hand toward her, to help her up, then thought better of it, seeing her flinch, and simply stepped back to give her room to climb up on her own. She did, settling her green frame onto the far end of the bench. "Name's Aldric," he said quietly, gathering the reins. "Reckon you heard it already. Few hundred times, probably. Folks like to say it like a curse. Your folks, most of all." She nodded and said nothing. "You all right up there, Miss Ashfang?" "It's Mrs. Thorne now," she whispered. The human name tasted like ash in an orc mouth. "Isn't it?" He didn't answer right away. He clicked his tongue, and the great beasts leaned into their harness, and the wagon began to climb the switchback road into the foothills, where the shadows were already growing long. "Only if you want it to be," he said, at last. The whole town watched them go. The climb took the better part of 2 hours, the road winding up through pine and gray rock as the valley fell away beneath them. Ravna had braced herself for the cold barracks of a soldier. A trophy room, maybe, hung with the weapons and the spoils of the war that had broken her people. That was what Thorne was, wasn't it? That was what everyone knew. So when they came around the last bend, and she saw the home of the mountain guardian, she actually forgot to be afraid for a moment. It was a great hall of fitted timber and grey stone, built into the very shoulder of the pass, with wide carved eaves and tall windows catching the last gold light of the day. Smoke curled warm and lazy from a stone chimney. There were flowers, hardy little alpine things, planted in a careful row beneath the front windows. It looked, she thought, with a strange lurch in her chest, like a place where someone had once been happy. Aldric climbed down and went around to her side. But he did not reach for her. He only waited, hands loose, until she came down on her own. "I'll show you inside," he said. And if her wariness wounded him, his weathered face didn't show it. The front room held a wide stone hearth, a hand-woven rug, a long table, and heavy furniture polished smooth by years of use. The whole hall smelled of wood smoke and pine pitch, and, underneath it, something that surprised her: fresh-baked bread, and something hearty and dark, simmering in an iron pot. And then she noticed something that stopped her cold in the doorway. She had braced her shoulders, expecting low human ceilings, narrow doorways, a chair too small for an orc's frame, a bed too short for her green legs. The thousand small daily humiliations of living in a world built for someone else. But the doorways here were tall, the chairs were great heavy things, reinforced and broad. And in the corner sat a wide new bed, the frame lashed and pegged with extra timber, plainly braced by someone who had reckoned carefully on the weight and size of an orc. He had built it for her, made his human house bigger to fit her in it, before he ever met her, before he knew her name was anything but a line on a contract. This man her people called the Pale Death had measured out a doorway and a bed for an orc he had never seen, so she would not have to fold herself small to live in his home. She didn't have the words for what that did to her chest, so she said nothing at all. "Kitchen's through there," Aldric rumbled, with a nod. "Pantry's stocked. I sent down for the kind of food I figured your people favor. Salt meat, root mash, the dark mountain barley. Hope I reckoned right. If I got it wrong, my steward Braca goes down to market come the third day of the week. He'll grumble about it. He grumbles about everything. Pay him no mind." He led her up a wide staircase, to a room with that braced four-poster bed and a quilt sewn in soft blue and cream. A washstand sat beneath a window that looked out across the whole valley to the far snow-tipped mountains. And on the inside of the door, heavy, gleaming newly fitted, was a thick iron bolt. "Use it if you need to," Aldric said. He stood out in the hall, deliberately keeping the whole width of the doorway between them, refusing to so much as step over the threshold. "I won't knock unless you ask me to. Not ever. You understand me?" "Yes," she managed. "I'll leave you to settle." He pulled the door shut with a soft, careful click. She threw the bolt the instant he was gone. Then she sat down on the edge of that braced bed and stared at her own trembling green hands until the light died. Some time after dark, she heard the floorboards groan under his weight as he came up the stairs. She froze, held her breath, stared at the bolt, but the steps stopped well short of her door. There was a faint rustle of cloth on wood. Then the floorboards groaned again, retreating, going back down. Much later, when she finally found the nerve to crack the door open, she found a bundle waiting on the floor of the hall, warm flatbread and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in clean cloth, set down without a knock. Morning came gray and bitter. Ravna ate the bread alone in her room. It was honest food, still faintly warm, and somehow that warmth softened the sharpest edge of her fear. From downstairs, voices drifted up. Whole valleys talking, boss. That was a new voice, gravelly, dry, world-weary, with the faint, orcish burr she knew in her bones. Down at the market they're laying bets. Half reckon you'll have her chained in the cellar by the spring thaw. Other half reckon she'll cut your throat in your sleep first. Then both halves are fools, Aldric said. She crept to the top of the stairs and looked down, and there in the kitchen was the steward. Not a human, a half-orc. Squat, leathery, deeply wrinkled, one tusk broken to a stump. His green-gray skin gone pale with age. An orc's blood in a human's house. She had not known such a thing was possible. They say you got yourself a rare prize, the half-orc, Braca, went on. A real, live Ashfang girl. Spoils of the war, all grown up. The silence after that was sharp enough to cut. She's not a prize, Aldrich said, and there was something low and dangerous in his voice now. Something that made Ravna press her green palm flat against the wall without knowing why. She's not spoils. She's my wife. You hear another man in that market call her. Either one. You bring me his name. Ravna stood there a long time, her hand against the wood, her heart doing something complicated. She did not have a name for. That afternoon, she came down at last and met the half-orc face to face. Braca looked her up and down with a long, dry squint, as if she were some that wouldn't quite add up. So, he said, in the old tongue, in her tongue, rough and rusty but real, the first orcish words she'd heard since she left her father's camp. The wife. He switched back to the human speech with a shrug. You're smaller than the bets had you. Half the market reckoned you for a war-band brute. I reckoned you for a frightened pup. I usually win. He thumped a flour sack. Don't look so shocked, girl. Half-orc. My mother's people would have spat at me. My father's did worse. So I came up this mountain 40 years back to keep house for the one human on this range who never once asked me which half of me to trust. He jabbed a thick finger at her. Pantry's the second door. Touch the dark jars up top, and you'll regret it. That's the boss's mountain liquor. Strips the varnish off tables. Everything else is yours. Don't thank me. I hate being thanked. And with that, the old half-orc shouldered his flour and stumped off, muttering that nobody ever appreciated a clean pantry until the sorry day they died in a dirty one. Despite everything, despite the fear still sitting cold and heavy in her belly, Ravna found the corner of her mouth twitching towards something that was almost, very nearly, a smile. 3 days passed like that. They moved around each other like two careful ghosts who'd been assigned the same house. Aldrich rose before dawn. She learned the heavy rhythm of his boots on the stairs, learned the sound of the great front door, learned the distant ring of an axe out in the cold morning. He never pushed. He never asked. He never once tried to claim anything that a contract might have said was his. And every single morning, there was warm bread. On the fourth morning, something shifted. She came down the stairs and found him already at the kitchen table, a heavy leather-bound book open in front of him, a steaming mug at his elbow, a charcoal stick pinched in his scarred fingers. He was writing, slowly, carefully, his lips moving over some word he was sounding out. He looked up, and for half a second, the great mountain guardian looked caught, almost embarrassed. He closed the book. "Mornin'," he said. For the first time since the wedding, she did not flee back up the stairs. She sat down across from him. She watched the surprise move across his weathered face and then disappear, smoothed back into stillness. He pushed a second steaming mug across the wide table toward her, without a word. She wrapped her green hands around it. The air between them felt as thin and fragile as river ice in March. "What is that?" she asked. Her own voice startled her. "The book." The tips of his ears went red. "Nothing," he said. Then, because she kept looking at him, "A journal. My mother taught me letters when I was a boy. Most soldiers I knew thought it was a soft, useless habit. I write down the days, so they don't all blur into one long, gray thing." He hesitated. Then he turned the book around and slid it an inch toward her, opening it to the page he'd been working on. "And lately, I've been trying to set down some words of the old tongue. Yours. Figured if a body's going to live in a man's house, the least he can do is learn how to say good morning in her own speech, so she's not so far from home in it. I'm making a mess of it." Braca laughs at me. She looked down at the page. There, in a soldier's heavy, careful, badly spelled hand, were a dozen Orcish words. "Good morning. Bread. Are you cold? You are safe here." A monster, she thought, who was teaching himself the language of the people he was supposed to have hated. A monster trying to learn how to tell her she was safe, in the only words that would reach all the way home. "Why?" she finally asked. And she wasn't asking about the book anymore, and they both knew it. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Aldric set down the charcoal stick. The whole hall seemed to hold its breath. "A man came to me 6 weeks back," he said slowly. "Up the road, smiling, clean coat. Name of Varkis, warbroker. He said the word broker the way another man might say vermin. He talked of a bond contract, said it'd be good for both sides. Said there was a girl, 19, an Ashfang, a clan fallen on hard times since the war. Said she was willing." Ravna stared down at the grain of the table. "You said yes," she whispered. "I said I'd think on it." He turned the journal slowly under one scarred finger. "I've lived up here alone a long while, Miss Ashfang. This hall is too big for one. There's empty rooms in it I haven't opened in years. And I'll tell you a true thing." His jaw worked. "I've spent a deal of nights up here, thinking on the war, on what I did in it, on the camps I burned, and the names I can't give back. I thought, maybe, if I could give one orc a home instead of a grave, maybe that'd be one small thing set right. Maybe it was time to stop being so alone with all of it." She lifted her eyes to his. "You didn't know," she said, and her voice broke clean down the middle. "You didn't know I had no choice. That my father gave me away to settle the blood debt and buy the clan a winter. That I never said yes to anything. That when Varkis smiled, my father wept and pressed his thumb to that contract anyway." For a long moment, the mountain guardian did not move at all. Then his jaw tightened, and something crossed his weathered face that she had absolutely not expected to find on the face of the man her people called the pale death. Shame. No, he said, very quietly. I did not know that. And then she told him everything. The 3 years of failed hunts after the war scattered her clan into the high cold. The blood debt the valley had hung around their necks. Her father, a proud headman, brought to his knees, Varkas appearing at their fire like a devil in a clean coat, offering survival at a price no one had let her agree to, and her father weeping as he sealed the contract anyway, because there was no other road left that didn't end with the whole clan dead in the snow. Aldric listened to the whole of it without once interrupting. His scarred hands stayed folded on the table, his face still as old stone. But she was learning already to read the storms moving underneath that stillness. When she finished, he let out a slow, heavy breath that seemed to come up from the floor of the mountain. I'm sorry, he said. I thought it was mutual, practical, a fair trade for two lonely people. His jaw worked. When I saw your face at that altar, saw how scared you were of me, saw you counting the floorboards toward the door, I understood. Too late, but I understood. You weren't given to a husband, girl. You were handed to the boogeyman your mother used to scare you with, and no one asked you. I'd have killed any man who did that to a daughter of mine, and I went and did it myself, without even knowing. She searched his weathered face for cruelty, for anger, for the lie underneath. She found neither. So you bonded yourself to me anyway, she said. I did. He met her eyes and held them. And I meant what I swore. Not I do. I will. I will try every single day to make right a thing that started wrong. You're my wife by the stone and the storm, Ravna of the Ashfang. But that does not mean I own one breath of you. The bolt's on your side of the door for a reason, and it stays there as long as you draw breath in this house. Something inside her chest loosened, just a little, just the smallest thread of it. Before she could find an answer, a heavy fist hammered on the front door. A valley boy stood on the porch, red-cheeked from the climb, holding out a folded paper and trying not to stare at the scarred warrior in the doorway, nor the orc woman behind him. F from the town council, sir, he stammered. For the lady. Aldric took it, unfolded it, and read. She watched his jaw harden by slow degrees, like rock cooling. He tossed the paper straight into the hearth fire. It curled, blackened, and was gone. What was that? Ravna asked. An invitation, he said flatly. A welcome reception for you. The whole town. Come to look at the orc the guardian married. Come to see if you eat with your hands, if you filed your tusks. Come to gawk. A low, dark sound in his chest. We're not going. I don't put my wife on display for a council that sold me a starving clan's daughter and now wants to play neighborly. She stared at him. My wife. He kept saying it. Not like a man stating ownership, but like a man stating a duty he had sworn to protect. That night, for the first time, Ravna did not throw the bolt all the way home. She left her bedroom door cracked open. Not wide, just a hand's width, just enough for the warm lamplight from the hall to spill across the floor of her room. When Aldric came up the stairs much later, his shape paused in that thin band of light. She held her breath, watching the shadow of him through the gap. He did not push the door. He did not knock. He stood there for one long moment, and she thought she heard something, a sound almost too low to catch, the kind of sound a tired man makes when he is afraid to hope. And then his footsteps moved on down the hall to his own room. The next morning, there was fresh bread on the table, warm and whole, and tucked beneath the loaf, where she would have to lift it to find it, there was a single line, written in heavy, careful charcoal, and beneath the human words, painstakingly copied out. The same thing again in the rough shapes of her own orcish tongue. It said, Day 1, that she came down the stairs on her own. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it very small and tucked it into the pocket over her heart. And she did not let him see that her eyes had gone hot and bright. She had been married at 19 to the most feared man in the borderlands, Aldric Thorne, the human mountain guardian, the warrior her own people called the Pale Death, sold by a smiling war broker to settle her starving clan's blood debt. She had climbed that mountain road, expecting an executioner. And instead she had found a hall with doorways built tall enough for an orc, a bed braced for her green frame before he ever knew her name, warm bread left at her door without a knock, and a grim old soldier teaching himself her language, one badly spelled word at a time. Aldric had sworn only one vow at that altar, not I do, I will. And now, slowly, day by careful day, Ravna was beginning to learn exactly what that vow meant. 2 weeks went by, and somewhere inside those 2 weeks, without either of them ever deciding it out loud, the 2 careful ghosts became something closer to 2 people sharing a life. Aldric rose before the dawn. Ravna learned the heavy music of his boots on the stairs and stopped flinching at it. She learned to bake the dark mountain bread her clan had lived on. And the first loaf she got right, she set down in front of his place instead of waiting for his to appear at hers. And the look that crossed his weathered face was worth every scorched batch that came before. She found his oldest coat with a split seam thrown over a chair, and, before she could think better of it, she mended it with the strong, neat stitches her mother had taught her. When he found it folded and whole, he held it in his scarred hands for a long time and didn't say a single word, and she understood that this, for him, was the loudest thanks a hard old soldier knew how to give. They spoke a little more each day, careful words, honest ones, and each morning the journal had a new line of Orcish in it, clumsy, improving. And some mornings she found herself, almost without meaning to, correcting his spelling with the charcoal stub, leaving the book open where he'd find it. He never said anything about that either, but the words got truer. One bright, cold morning, over the steam of the root coffee, Aldric cleared his throat. "You ever ridden?" he asked. "Orcs walk," she said. "We're too heavy for most horses. They break." "Got something that won't break," he said. "Come see." He led her out to the paddock behind the hall and brought out, not a horse, but a great shaggy mountain ram, the size of a plow ox, broad-backed and patient, with curling horns, and a coat the color of autumn bracken. Its name, he said, was Cinder. Bred for the high passes, carry an orc all day, and ask for an apple after. Gentler than me, anyhow. Lower bar to clear. He showed her how to hold the rein, and sit and guide the animal with the lightest pressure instead of forcing it, his scarred hands hovering near hers, touching only when she truly needed steadying. And when Cinder finally ambled forward beneath her, steady and warm and sure, and Ravna felt herself moving, carried, free for the length of a single breath, she laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, a short, startled, bright sound that rang off the cold rocks. It surprised them both, and Aldric smiled, a real one. It changed his whole weathered face, softened the scars, crinkled the corners of his gray eyes, made the feared mountain guardian look, for one heartbeat, almost young. That night, she peeked, just once, just quickly, at the open journal while he was out latching the paddock. There was a new line, in his careful hand, with the Orcish copied underneath. She laughed today. I had mere forgotten the sound a hall makes when somebody laughs in it. She closed the book very gently, as if it were a sleeping thing, and went up to bed with that complicated, warm ache back inside her chest. It happened on the 9th night. Ravna woke in the black hour before dawn to a sound that turned her orcish blood to ice water, a high, broken howling, many throats of it, coming up the slope. Not wolves, worse. Frost wraiths, the gaunt, half-starved raiders that came down out of the high passes when the cold drove them. The very reason a frightened valley paid a guardian to hold the road. And tonight they had come for the rams in the high pen, and for whatever else they could carry off. She heard the front door of the hall crash open below. She heard Aldric's voice, but it was not the low, careful rumble she had grown used to. It was a battlefield roar, a sound of such pure, cold fury that the howling outside actually faltered. She crept to the top of the stairs in her nightclothes, shaking, and for the first time she understood, truly understood, what her people had been so afraid of. He was at the open door, filling it, a great war blade in one fist that she hadn't even known he owned. Beyond him, in the moonlight, she could see them, lean shapes darting at the edges of the firelight, more than she could count. And he met them the way a cliff meets the sea. This was the pale death. This was the thing the Psalms were about. Get back, girl. Braca was suddenly at her elbow, gray-faced, a cleaver in his old half-orc fist, pulling her toward the deeper dark. Up here, behind me. But she had stopped, because she was watching her husband. Aldric did not charge out after them in a glory-mad rush, the way the war songs told it. He planted himself square in the doorway, the one way in, and he held it. He put the whole of his scarred body between every raider on that mountain and the Orc Girl asleep upstairs. He took a slash across the forearm that would have killed a smaller man, and never gave a single step of ground. He was not fighting for rams. She understood that suddenly and completely, watching from the top of the stairs. He was fighting for the door, for what was behind it. For her, the very thing that had made her people fear him their whole lives, that terrible, unbending strength, was standing in a doorway in the dark, spending itself to keep her safe. When the gray light finally came, the wraiths were gone, driven back down the slope, leaving the high pen scattered, but the hall untouched. Aldric stood in the wreck of the doorway, chest heaving, blood running dark down one arm, and turned to find her standing there at the top of the stairs, where she had watched the whole of it. And here was the thing she would think about for the rest of her life. She did not run from him, not from the blood, not from the blade, not from the terrible battle fury still cooling in his gray eyes. She ran toward him. She came down those stairs and crossed the wrecked hall and stopped just short of him, her green hands hovering, her whole body trembling, not with fear of him, she realized. Not any more, but with fear for him. "You're hurt," she breathed. Sit down, you great stubborn fool of a man, before you fall down." And Aldric Thorne, the mountain guardian, the terror of the high passes, the pale death of 100 orcish lullabies, sat. She fetched water and clean cloth and a needle, and she made him hold his slashed forearm out across the table under the lamp, while she cleaned it. It was the first time she had ever truly touched him on purpose. His skin was warm and rough and crossed with old scars, and as she wiped the blood away, she saw that the arm, both arms, and the broad slope of his shoulders where the nightshirt was torn, was covered in markings. She had taken them at a distance for the war paint or the battle honors of a soldier. But this close, under the lamp, she saw they were lines. Rows and rows of small, careful, deliberate marks worked into the skin in dark ink. "What are they?" she asked softly, dabbing at the wound. "These marks, are they kills?" She made herself say it. "Are they my people?" A low, rough sound, almost a laugh, but with no humor anywhere in it. "No," Aldrich said. He looked down at his own marked arm as if it belonged to someone else. "Names. Every one of them's a name. The men who held that pass with me and didn't come home from it. I carry them in the skin, so I'll have them till I'm dust. So I don't ever let myself pretend they didn't happen, or pretend the war was clean. It wasn't. There's none on either side as carries it clean." His jaw worked. "Some of these names died killing your kin, girl. Some of your kin put some of these names in the ground. I won't lie to you about that. I've stopped lying to myself about it, finally, and I'll not start lying to you." Her needle paused. She looked at the sheer number of the marks, far more than one war should hold, and her throat closed. "That's a great many," she whispered. "It was a bad war," he said quietly. "The worst kind. The kind where, after, neither side can rightly say what it was all for. They made me a guardian because I was good at not dying. Turns out it's the cruelest gift there is. You outlast everybody, and then you've got to sit up a mountain alone with all their names." She finished stitching the wound in silence, her green hands very gentle. And when she tied off the last stitch, she did something she did not plan and could not have explained. She laid her green palm flat over the rows of inked names on his forearm, just held it there, as if to say, "I see them. I see what the war costs you too. You don't have to carry them alone in this hall anymore." He went very still under her hand. He did not pull away. It was a week later, deep in a cold November night, that she came downstairs and found a lamp glowing out on the porch. Aldrich sat on the broad step in the dark, the cold mountain stars wheeling overhead, turning something small in his scarred fingers. She pulled a blanket around her green shoulders and, after a moment's hesitation, went out and sat down beside him, close, closer than she would have dared a month ago. Without a word, he opened his hand and showed her. It was a small painted locket, the brass worn smooth as river glass from years of a thumb passing over it. Inside, fine and faded, was the portrait of a human woman with kind, laughing eyes, and cradled in her arms, a small, round-cheeked boy. "Mara," Aldric said, and his gravel voice had gone rougher still. "My first wife, and our boy, Jacob." He'd have been near grown by now. His thumb moved over the little painted faces the way it must have moved 10,000 times. A fever came through the valley, the winter after the war ended. Took them both, inside 3 days of each other, 5 winters gone now. "I'm so sorry," Ravna whispered, and meant it down to the floor of her soul. "So am I," he said, "every single day." He was quiet for a long moment, the lamplight gold on his scarred face. Then he turned, finally, and looked right at her. "But here's what the carrying taught me, girl. Loving them, keeping them in my journal and my hand, and the empty side of that bed. That doesn't mean I have to stop living. Doesn't mean I'm not allowed to ever care for somebody else again. A heart's not a debt. It doesn't run out. I had to learn that the hard way, sitting up here alone, 5 winters. I'd hate for you to have to learn it the same." The cold drove them inside. After that, they sat by the fire, neither speaking but close, green shoulder almost to scarred arm. And it was the most peaceful Ravna had felt since long before a smiling man in a clean coat had ever come to her father's fire. The first true snow of the season came 3 days later, falling soft and thick and silent, burying the whole pass in white before dawn. Ravna woke to a hall that smelled of wood smoke and to a strange, hesitant scraping coming from the great room. She came downstairs and found Aldric crouched at the hearth, and beside him the old half-orc Braca, arms crossed, wearing the deeply pained expression of a craftsman watching an amateur ruin something sacred. On the hearthstones, Aldric was clumsily trying to lay out a circle of stones around the fire, a bowl of salt, a sprig of mountain heather. He had a scrap of paper in one hand that he kept squinting at. "First snow," Aldric said gruffly, not looking up, his ears going red. "Among your people, the Ashfang. The morning of the first snow, the eldest of a hall lays the heather ring and shares salt from one bowl, one hand. So everybody under the roof eats from the same fire. So nobody's a guest. Everybody's hall." He scowled at the paper. "Braca told me how it goes. I'm making a hash of it. But this is your home now, near as I can make it one. Figured the least I could do was keep your snow the way your mother would have kept it. Not mine. Yours." Ravna stood frozen in the doorway, her hand at her mouth. He had learned her people's first snow rite. The feared human warrior, the pale death himself, was crouched on his own hearth in the dark, fumbling salt and heather, trying to give an orc girl the one morning of the year that smelled like home. "You've got the stones wrong," she said, when she could speak. Her voice was thick. "The opening faces east, toward the first light." "See?" I said east, Braca muttered, not having said east at all. She crossed the room and knelt down beside her husband in the firelight, and with her own green hands she turned the stones to face the dawn. And then she took the bowl of salt from his scarred fingers, and she shared it with him. One hand, one fire, the way her mother had. and the way her mother's mother had before the war ever came. She was not being made into something. She was being offered her own self back, in a human house, by human hands that had taken the trouble to learn how. There was a whole world of difference between those two things, and she had thought, when she climbed that mountain road, that she would never feel the second one again, as long as she lived. "There's one more part," she said softly, and she set out a fourth portion of salt, at no one's place, and laid a piece of bread beside it, for the ones who aren't here. First snows for everybody under the roof, living and not. She looked at him. Mara should have her salt too. And Jacob, their hall. Aldric Thorne, the terror of the borderlands, put his scarred face in his scarred hands and wept just once, just quietly, on his own hearth in the firelight. And Ravna laid her cream hand on his bent shoulder and let him. Now, if this story has its hooks in you the way I think it does, if you're sitting there feeling every bit of that firelight, do me one small favor. Take a second and subscribe. Leave this video a like, and then go down to the comments and tell us, how many entries do you reckon Aldric has written in that journal of his by now? 100? 1,000? How many lonely nights do you think before she ever came up that road? Drop your number down below, because we read them, and there are a whole lot more stories like this, one waiting for you, right here on Orc and Human Stories. Now, back to the mountain. A week later, another paper came up the road, and this one Aldric could not simply toss in the fire. It was a summons to the Valley's Harvest Social, the great seasonal gathering held in the council hall. And by old ironclad custom, every bonded woman in the valley was expected to attend. To stay away was a public insult that would fall not on Aldric, but on Ravna. It would brand her as the orc the Guardian kept caged. It would prove every cruel whisper right. "You don't have to do this," Aldric said, standing by the door, the summons crushed in one fist. "Let them talk. I've been the thing folk talk about my whole life. I can carry it." "I know you can," Ravna answered, and she lifted her chin, her small tusks catching the light. "But I'm tired of hiding up this mountain like I'm something to be ashamed of. I'm not. I need to walk in there on my own 2 feet and let them look at me standing up straight." He looked at her for a long moment, and something like pride moved across his weathered face. "Then I'll drive you down," he said, "and I'll be right outside that door the whole time. You want out. You say the word, and I'll carry the whole council hall off the side of this mountain." Politely. She almost laughed. Politely. "I'm a guardian," he said gravely. "I've got manners." The council hall smelled of weak tea and false smiles. The valley women were gathered in their tight little circles, and every voice in the room dropped to a hush when Ravna stepped through the door alone, a green orc woman in a plain human dress, her tusks small but plain, her eyes steady. They looked at her clawed hands, her unbroken posture. They had clearly been hoping for a cowering brute, a snarling, chained half-wild thing they could fear out loud and feel righteous about. It was a woman named Mrs. Dunmore who finally stepped forward, her smile sharp enough to skin a rabbit. "Well," she said sweetly, loud enough for the whole hushed room, "do tell us, dear, how does it feel to be bought and sold like livestock at market? Or is that simply how it's done among your kind?" A few cruel titters rippled out behind her. At least the guardian got value, another woman added, behind a raised teacup. After all the orcs he put in the ground in the war. Fitting he should get to keep one as a pet. Your father got a fine price for you, I heard. Settled a whole clan's debt with one girl. And something inside Ravna of the Ashfang broke. Clean, clear, like ice going off a roof in one sheet. She set down her cup. The little click of it on the saucer was the only sound in the room. And then she stood, and at her full orcish height, she stood a head over every powdered woman there, and not one of them could pretend in that moment that she was small. And she let them all have the truth. My father, she said, and her voice did not shake, was a headman who watched his people starve in the cold this valley left them in after the war you all cheered for. He was a proud man, brought so low. He wept the night he sealed me away. He did the only thing left to him that did not end with his clan dead in the snow. And not one of you, not one, sent so much as a sack of grain up into those passes, while orc children died in them. She swept her gaze across the circle of frozen, powdered faces. Your husbands fought the war. Your husbands made the debt. And now you sip your tea and call me the animal. So judge me all you like, ladies. But do not you dare judge me for surviving, when there's not a one of you would have lasted a single night of the winters I have. The silence that followed was absolute. Ravna picked up her shawl. She did not weep, though her eyes burned with it, and she did not let a single tear fall in that room. She lifted her head, and she walked out through the parted, staring crowd, and she kept walking all the way up that long, cold mountain road, alone under a hard November sky. Aldric found her on the porch an hour later, her face raw from the wind, and the crying she'd done only once. She was sure no one in that hall could see it. She told him everything. He listened, that weathered face still and focused, the storms moving underneath. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. They won't speak to you like that again, he said. You can't control them, Aldric, she said tiredly. You can't make a whole valley kind to an orc. No. He stepped closer, and his voice was very low and very certain. But I can make sure they hear me a sight louder than they hear their own gossip. There's a way to settle this. A right way, where you come out of it standing taller than the lot of them. But I'll need you to trust me to do it. Can you do that? Can you trust me? She looked up into the gray eyes of the man she had been so terrified of. The pale death, the name in her own childhood nightmares. The man who'd built a bed for her frame, who left bread at her door, who put his own body in a doorway between her and the dark, who learned her people's snow rite and wept on his own hearth. Yes, she said, I trust you. That night, neither of them noticed the lone rider sitting his horse at the foot of the mountain road, watching the warm lights of the hall, smiling, a clean and patient smile. She had been sold at 19 to settle her clan's blood debt. An orc girl handed to Aldric Thorne, the human mountain guardian her own mother had used to frighten her as a cub. She had climbed that road in terror and found, instead of an executioner, a hall built to fit her, a soldier teaching himself her language, a man who carried his war dead in his skin and his lonely days in a journal. She had watched him plant his own scarred body in a doorway to keep the dark off her, and knelt with him on his hearth as he wept over her people's first snow rite. and in the falling snow, she had told him she would still be there to see the spring. But down at the foot of the mountain, a smiling man in a clean coat had been watching the warm lights of that hall. And a debt that is paid is not always a debt that is finished. He came up the road 2 mornings later, alone, on a fine pale horse, smiling his clean and patient smile. Varkas. Aldric was out at the high pen, mending the fence the wraiths had torn down. Braca had gone to the valley market. So it was Ravna, and Ravna alone. Who opened the great front door to find the war broker standing on the porch, hat in his soft, uncalloused hands, looking at her the way a man looks at a coin he is deciding whether to spend? "Mrs. Thorne," he said warmly, "or do you still think of yourself as Ashfang? They so rarely settle, the bought ones. I'll be brief. I find myself in a position to do you a great kindness. I want nothing from you," she said. Her voice was steady, but her clawed hand had tightened on the doorframe. "Ah, but you'll want this." He drew a folded paper from his coat, and she recognized with a lurch the clan mark of the Ashfang pressed into the wax. "Your clan's blood debt was settled, yes. But debts, dear girl, are such layered things. Interests, brokerage fees, the cost of arranging a willing bond on short notice. Small print, your father, in his desperation, could not read." The smile never wavered. "The short of it, your people are not yet free. A balance remains, and it comes due in the spring. When it does, the valley takes their winter range, and we both know what that means for a clan in the high cold." The green drained from Ravna's face. "You're lying," she whispered. "I never lie. I simply arrange." He tucked the paper away. "That balance can vanish. Forgiven, your clans range theirs forever, under one small condition." His voice dropped, silk over a blade. "The bond up here is dissolved. Quietly, you go free of the brute who slaughtered your kin, and a more suitable arrangement is found elsewhere. I have buyers who'd pay handsomely for a tamed Ashfang. You'd be saving your whole people. And surely, dear girl, you don't want to spend your one life buried up a mountain with the butcher of your own blood." And there it was, the trap, sprung clean. Stay with Aldric, and her clan loses their range in the spring. Leave him, let Varkas sell her on like a beast, and her people go free. She had been sold once to save her clan. Now the price had to be paid all over again. "Get off this mountain," she said, very quietly. "Think on it," Varkas said pleasantly, settling his hat. "You have until the thaw. Such a lovely season, the spring." And he tipped his hat and rode away down the switchbacks, smiling all the while. That night, sleep would not come. Ravna sat at the small table in her room with a packed bag at her feet and a folded letter beside the lamp. The hall was quiet below her, the deep, heavy quiet of a place with someone sleeping in it who trusts the dark. She picked the letter up and read again the words she had written through shaking green hands. She was not leaving because she feared him. She would never fear him again. She was leaving for him and for her people. Because if she stayed, Varkas would take the clan's range in the spring and let them freeze. And worse, far worse, she had begun to understand that the broker would not stop there. A man like that did not lose gracefully. He would turn the whole valley against Aldric. He would whisper that the Guardian had taken an orc bride and beggared an honest broker. He would make the man who had finally started to live again into the monster the war songs already said he was. And the one thing Ravna could not bear, the one thing she now knew she could not live with, was being the reason the whole world decided Aldric Thorne was nothing but the pale death after all. Kindness, she had learned, up on this mountain, could cut deeper than any cruelty. She loved him too much to be the blade that ruined him. So she would go quietly before dawn and let him keep his good name and let her people keep their range, and she would carry the warm side of that door with her for the rest of her life, wherever they sold her next. She wrote it all down, and she folded the letter, and she set it where he would find it. Dawn came pale and gray and cold. She crept down the stairs with the bag in her hand, every board threatening to betray her, and stopped at the bottom. Aldric was already there. He stood by the long table, fully dressed, the lamp lit, her open letter held in his two scarred hands. He had found it. He had read it, and he looked in the gray morning light, older than she had ever seen him, tired in a way that went deeper than any night of lost sleep, tired in his bones, in the very ink on his arms. For a long moment neither of them spoke. "You're free to go," he said at last. Very quietly, he set the letter down on the table gently, the way you'd set down something fragile. You always were. The bolt was always on your side of the door, Ravna. I meant that the first night, and I mean it now. If going is what keeps you safe, if it's what keeps your people's range, then go. I won't stop you. I'd never stop you, his jaw worked. I won't pretend it doesn't take a piece of me with you. That's all. That's the only claim I'll ever make. And the bag slipped from her green fingers and thumped to the floor, and her eyes filled, and the tears she had refused the whole valley came at last. "Then why," she whispered, "does it feel so hard to leave?" He took a single step toward her, and then stopped himself, the way he always did, leaving her the space, leaving her the choice. "Why did you really marry me?" she asked him through the tears. "Not the practical reason, not the lonely hall, not the war you wanted to set right. The truth, Aldric. I want the true reason before I walk out that door." The mountain guardian drew a long breath, and it shuddered coming out of him. "Because when I saw you at that altar," he said, "scared half to death of me, counting the floor toward the door, given to the boogeyman of your own childhood, and not one soul in that room, asking if you wanted it. I thought, there's two of us, two creatures everybody else had already decided what to do with. The orc and the orc killer. The two things this valley loves to be afraid of. I thought, maybe between the two of us, we could stop being so alone with what was done to us and what we did. Maybe two broken things could build one whole thing out of the pieces." His voice cracked. This hard old soldier's voice, cracked clean down the middle, like her own had at the altar. "I knew it wasn't fair to you. I knew it the second I saw your face. I never had any right to hope. But I hoped anyway. God's helped me every single day since you came down those stairs on your own. I have hoped that one day you might choose to stay. Not because of a contract, not because of a debt, just because you wanted the warm side of this door as much as I wanted you on it. The whole hall went silent. The fire ticked. The cold dawn pressed at the windows. And Ravna felt the choice settle into her chest, heavy and calm, both at once, the way the first snow settles on a mountain that has been waiting all year for it. She bent down, she picked up the bag, and she watched the last light go out of his gray eyes. And then she turned and carried it back up the stairs and unpacked every last thing in it. When she came back down, she crossed the room to where he stood, frozen, not daring to believe it. And she took the folded letter off the table and pressed it into his scarred hands. "Keep it," she said. "Put it in the journal with the rest of the days, so you'll never forget there was a morning I almost left and chose not to." She closed his fingers around it. "I choose you, Aldric. Not the debt, not the clan, not because anybody's making me. I choose you. I choose us." Relief broke across the mountain guardian's weathered face, quiet and real, and so deep it looked almost like grief. "Then let me settle this the right way," he said, low and certain. "Varkas, the valley, all of it. Let me do this one thing for us. You won't have to run from anybody ever again. Not for me, not for your people." He held her eyes. "But I'll need you to trust me through what comes next. It'll mean facing the whole valley on a Sunday." She didn't even hesitate. "I trust you," she said. The week passed in a strange, charged quiet. Aldric rode down the mountain twice and came back grim and silent, with rolled papers under his arm and the look of a man laying careful stones for something large. He met with people Ravna did not know. A valley scribe, a circuit magistrate down from the high pass, and, to her astonishment, two gray-bearded elders of her own Ashfang clan, who came down out of the high cold and spoke with the human guardian late into the night in the old tongue, while Braca translated and grumbled in equal measure. He told her almost nothing. "Trust me," was all he'd say. "You'll see it Sunday with everybody else." Braca was no help at all. "Don't ask me," the old half-orc grumbled, polishing the long unused front benches as if for a feast. 40 years I've kept this hall. Do I get told the plan? No." He rubbed a bench to a shine. "All I know is he had me dig out the deed box. Hasn't opened that box since." He stopped. His leathery face did something complicated. "Since the first wife. Long, long time." And he turned away and wouldn't say another word. And Ravna pretended not to see the old half-orc wipe at his eyes with the back of one wrist. By Saturday night, the whole valley was buzzing. The guardian had called a gathering. The council, the magistrate, the elders of two peoples, every soul in Stone Hollow, to the valley hall the next morning. And nobody, not the gossips, not Varkas, who'd hurried back up the pass with his clean smile and his folded papers. Nobody knew what the guardian meant to do. And if you're still with us this far, if you followed her all the way up that mountain and all the way to this Sunday morning, then I think it's safe to say you're part of this story now, same as the rest of us. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if Ravna's earned one from you, and tell us down in the comments of everything Aldric wrote in that journal every lonely day, every line about her laugh, every word of her language he taught himself just to reach her. Which entry hit you the hardest? Tell us below. This has been Orc and Human Stories. Now let's go see what the Guardian came to say. Sunday morning came bright and hard and cold, the new snow glittering on every roof in the valley. The great hall was packed to the walls, the whole of Stone Hollow, the sharp smiling women of the social, the council, the magistrate on his bench, and, standing grey and silent at the back, like old stones come to watch the two elders of the Ashfang clan. And there, near the front, in his clean coat, sat Varkas, smiling, confident, certain he held every card that mattered. Aldric and Ravna walked in together, and the room hushed the way a room does before a storm. Before the council could so much as call the gathering to order, the mountain guardian stepped forward, and his voice filled the hall to the rafters. With the magistrate's leave, he said, I'll speak first. The magistrate, who had clearly been paid the proper respects in advance, nodded. Most of you, Aldrich said, turning slowly to face the whole staring valley, think you know how my wife came to me? You think I bought her. You think the old orc killer took himself a trophy off a beaten clan. His gaze landed for one cold second on Mrs. Dunmore, who went pale. You're wrong. So hear it once, plain, with the magistrate as my witness. He held up a paper. What was paid was a debt, a blood debt. This valley hung on the Ashfang, after a war we all share the shame of. That's the only thing that ever changed hands. I never bought a person. There's no creature alive with a price, orc or human, and any man who tells you different, his gray eyes found Varkas, is selling something rotten. He let it fall and took up a second paper. And here's what I give, witnessed and sealed by the magistrate, the valley scribe, and the elders of the Ashfang. This very morning, he unrolled it. I have signed over to Ravna of the Ashfang, in her own name alone, the eastern valley of my holding. 200 acres. Water, grazing, timber, stone. And the high winter range above it, deeded free and clear to her clan in her keeping, beyond the reach of any debt, any interest, or any fee a clever man in a clean coat might care to invent. A gasp went through the hall like wind through dry grass. Varkas's smile froze solid on his face. That land cannot be touched by me, nor by any broker living, Aldrich went on. It is hers and her people's under the magistrate's seal. She can work it, sell it, or burn the deed for warmth if it pleases her. She is not my property. She never was. She is my partner. My wife, by her own free choosing, made this very week before all of you. And I will see her and her people treated in this valley with the respect owed to free folk and landholders. Anyone with a quarrel, he spread his scarred arms almost gently, is welcome up my mountain to discuss it, politely. The hall was dead silent. Then Aldrich sat down in the front row, beside Ravna, and in front of the entire valley, in front of the council and the magistrate and the frozen, ruined broker. The mountain guardian reached out and took her green-clawed hand in his scarred one, and held it. Ravna stood. Her knees were trembling, but her voice, when it came, did not. I stayed, she said, looking out at the valley that had sold her and gawked at her and called her an animal, because I want to, not because of a debt, not because of a contract, not because anyone made me. She found her father's face, for he had come, the old headman had come down out of the cold to stand with the elders, and he was weeping openly now, and she gave him the smallest nod. I was given a bolt for my own door, on the first night, by a man this whole valley calls a butcher. I was given a bed built to fit me before he knew my name. I was given bread and patience, and my own people's snow rite kept by human hands that took the trouble to learn it. She lifted her chin, her tusks catching the light. I was given my own self back, and my dignity with it, when not one of you would give me even your pity for free. And so I choose this man. Every day I choose him. And I'll thank the lot of you to never again pretend you know the first thing about my marriage or my people. The silence stretched long, and then, from the back, an old woman rose slowly to her feet, leaning on a cane, the oldest soul in the valley. I was wrong, she said, into the quiet. Her voice cracked with age and with something else. About both of you. I've lived in this valley 80 winters. I cheered that war when I was young and foolish, and I judged that mountain my whole life, and I was wrong. She sat back down, and one by one, others nodded. Some looked at their own boots. Mrs. Dunmore would not raise her eyes from her lap. It did not undo what had been done, but it was, Ravna understood, the sound of a whole valley being made to look, for once, at the size of its own smallness. Only one man did not move. Varkas sat frozen in his clean coat, his folded papers useless in his lap, his whole leverage turned to ash. The range was safe. The magistrate had seen the deed, and no invented interest could touch land held free and clear under his seal. The bond could not be quietly dissolved against a freely choosing, land-holding wife. The broker had nothing left to sell, and nothing left to threaten, and a hall full of witnesses watching him realize it. He rose, very stiffly, and put on his hat. Leaving so soon? Braca called out cheerfully from the side of the hall, in the single happiest moment of the old half-orc's entire life. Mind the road. It gets ever so steep on the way down. Some folk never come back up it at all. Varkas left. He did not come back up the mountain road. Not that spring, nor any spring after. Outside the hall, the winter sun spilled gold across the snow. You gave my whole clan their range back, Ravna whispered, still half unable to believe it. I gave you a way out, Aldric corrected gently. Land that's yours, and no one else's. So every day you stay, you'll know down to your bones it's because you chose to, not because you were trapped. I never want you to wonder, not once, ever again. She stopped walking and looked up at the gray-eyed man she had been so terrified of that first cold morning at the altar, a lifetime ago. Aldric, she said, I want to read the journal, all of it. He went still. It's just days, he said gruffly. Most of it's grim, most of it's lonely. I want to know the days before me, too, she said softly. Will you let me? And so that evening, by the fire, the mountain guardian laid the worn leather book in her green hands and let her read. She read 5 winters of single grim lines. Snow came. The pass is quiet. Mara would have known what to say to the cold. She read the day Mara and the boy died, and the page after it that was simply blank, that he had not been able to write on at all. She read the long gray years where some days said only, still here, don't know why. And then she came to a day 6 weeks before a wedding. A broker came, talked of an Orc Girl, Ashfang, 19. I said I'd think on it. Maybe it's penance. Maybe I'm just tired of being alone with the war. And then, the wedding day. Her name is Ravna. She was so afraid of me, of the name they scared her with as a cub. I have done a cruel thing without meaning to. I will spend whatever's left of me trying to make it right. And then, day after day, the entries grew, longer, warmer, with more and more of her own language scratched carefully beneath them. She came down the stairs on her own. She laughed today. I had forgot the sound. She turned the snowstones east and gave Mara and Jacob their place at the fire. She put her hand on the names in my arm and did not pull away. She said she'd see the spring. She came back down the stairs with the bag, and then she carried it back up. Gods, she chose to stay. Ravna closed the book. Her green face was wet. The fire crackled. How many entries do you think are in here? She whispered. 5 winters of them. More. Too many lonely ones, Aldric rumbled softly. Not near enough of the good kind, yet. He reached over and very carefully turned to a fresh blank page. But there's a deal of empty pages left. And I aim to fill every one of them with you, in both our tongues. Spring came early to the mountain that year. The crocus and snowdrops Aldric had planted came up first, just as he'd promised, pushing bright and stubborn straight through the last of the melting snow. And then Ravna planted something of her own, out in the good earth of the eastern valley. Her valley, her 200 acres, hers and her clan's, free and clear. She planted apple trees. Those'll take years to bear fruit, Aldric said, leaning on the fence, watching her press the slim saplings into the dark spring soil with her strong green hands. 5, maybe 6, this high up. Long time to wait on an apple. Ravna straightened up, dirt on her hands, the whole green valley at her back, and she smiled at him, that bright, free, startling smile that had once surprised them both, and now lived on her face like it had always belonged there. Good, she said. I'm not going anywhere. They worked side by side as the sun climbed the old fence, still standing between the hall and the world. Not as a cage now, but as a reminder, every single day, that staying behind it had been her own free choice. And back inside the hall, on the wall above the great stone hearth, in a simple wooden frame Aldric had carved with his own scarred hands, hung a single folded letter, the one she had written the night she almost left. She had asked him to frame it and hang it there, where they'd both pass it 100 times a day, so neither of them would ever forget. There had been a gray morning when she'd packed a bag to walk out that door, and had chosen, instead, to stay, so that every ordinary day in that warm hall would carry the quiet weight of having been chosen. That night, the journal got a new entry, and this time Ravna wrote it herself, in her own clawed hand, on the first of all those empty pages, in the old tongue, with the human words copied carefully beneath, the way he always did it for her, while the great mountain guardian watched over her shoulder and pretended his gray eyes weren't shining. It said, Day 1 of the rest of it. I planted apples that won't fruit for years. That's the whole point. I'm staying long enough to taste them. In the hall, where fear had once lived, where a lonely man had carried his whole dead world in his skin, and where an orc girl had once counted 12 floorboards to a door, she was too afraid to run for. Love, at long last, had found a place to stay, and it left the door open. If this story moved you, you'll find more like it. More lonely halls, more only hearts learning to stay. Right here on Orc and Human Stories. Subscribe, and we'll keep the fire lit for you.